All right, let's go ahead and start. I'm not quite sure what's going on with YouTube here. There we go. Okay, we're good. Again, I'm going to keep an eye on that, make sure it doesn't drop out. All right, here we go. Let's go ahead and give her a start.
Welcome to the Sleppy Sports Podcast. Now, here's your host, the most unrecognizable name in sports, Jared Sleppy!
Thank you, deep, ominous voice in my head. It is day 3 of our 5-day streak podcast, and we are breaking down the Big Ten this evening. We've got the ACC down on Monday, Big 12 yesterday, and today, Big Ten. Tomorrow, Pac-12, Friday will be the SEC. So if you want to listen to those first, you can go back and pretty much anywhere where this podcast is carried, you can listen to those there and catch up, because I will be referring to those multiple times throughout the broadcasts. So, again, Big Ten. Will the Michigan Wolverines be able to get over the hump and finally make not only a Big Ten championship, but a college football playoff contention? Will Ohio State repeat, or will we have a new champion? Well, let's go ahead and start in the Big Ten East, starting with, the Indiana Hoosiers. This has been a pretty interesting past few years for Indiana. They've had some pretty good football teams, but never really been able to get in contention. So could this be the year where they possibly do something different? So last year they went 5-7. They get their starting running back Stevie Scott back after an 1,100-yard season. They have their best defensive back Marcelino Ball after getting the third most tackles on the team last season with 59. Is also he was second in the nation in takeaways last year. They had the same quarterback, Peyton Ramsey, returning. Wasn't great, but was solid. And overall, quality running back returning with Ramsey's ability to use his legs, because that is where the majority of his yards come from, is his ability to scramble and get out of the pocket. The running game should be pretty strong. As for some of the problems that I've run into with this team, they do have new offensive and defensive coordinators. Head coach Tom Allen used to do the play calling for the defensive side, but hands it over. And safety Jonathan Crawford is done at Indiana after leading the Hoosiers in tackles with 67. And like I said, the passing game could definitely use some work. Defense allowed almost 30 points a game last season, which needs to improve significantly if they want to hang with some of the big boys like Ohio State, Penn State, Michigan, and Michigan State. Very tough division, very difficult for someone like Indiana to come up with some wins over those teams, but it's definitely possible. So let's go ahead and get into the schedule, but actually first, before I do that, I want to say that all 10 wins in Tom Allen's first 2 seasons have been with them being the favorites. So he has not been able to get over the hump with any upsets. It has been a problem for Tom Allen in his tenure at Indiana. So starting off with week 1, they got a match versus Ball State. I think they should be able to take care of that, as well as a week 2 game with Eastern Illinois. They start off 2-0. And then, they jump right into conference play with a game against Ohio State on September 14th. That's going to be a tough one there. I do think they dropped that one, but come back with a win versus UConn. Now, UConn is going to be a little bit better than they were last year, but, it's been overall a very difficult time for UConn football to make themselves a name. It's been a long time since UConn was relevant in the football spectrum, but they're a few steps away. They do have some work, because they are kind of in the crowd of like the Rutgers and the KUs of the world, trying to break free and get back to relevance. They then have a game against Michigan State on the road. I think they dropped that one for obvious reasons, and then they they beat Rutgers at home on October 12th, and then they get a tough 4-game stretch at Maryland, at Nebraska, Northwestern at home, and Penn State on the road. I think, unfortunately, they lose all 4 of those games. I think they come back with a win over Michigan in what should be a trap game, with the Michigan Wolverines coming down to the final couple of weeks with a possible college football playoff contention in sight. Now, this is going to be a trap game for Michigan, but I think Indiana is going to show that they have some potential, which they absolutely do. As mentioned, Peyton Ramsey is a pretty solid quarterback, and they do have a very good run game. I think by this time, I think Ramsey's passing game will also kind of have gelled, and I don't think they're going to lose the last 6 of the games, but I do think they lose their final game on the road at Purdue, and that gives Tom Allen in his 3rd season at Indiana another 5-7 season, 2-7 in conference play. Tom Allen will probably be on the hot seat with 3 consecutive 5-7 seasons. As for the Maryland Terrapins, last year they finished 5-7, but they do have a lot of upside. And, they got Virginia Tech transfer quarterback Josh Jackson to come and shake things up after a pretty poor season last year. He really needs to turn around. I think a fresh place or a new place will definitely help his game here at Maryland. You also have running back Anthony McFarland coming back. He went over 1,000 yards last season and should be able to produce. And he's coming off a 298-yard performance against Ohio State in their 52-51 loss. That was just a fantastic game all around, and probably going to be some games like that this season with Maryland possibly having a very solid team again in 2019. So last year, obviously, defense was not the best. I think it will improve this season, and getting Josh Jackson acclimated into the system will be tough because Josh Jackson is, to me, the kind of guy that is a little bit arrogant and kind of needs to humble himself to get himself to perform at a Division I level at Maryland. It's not going to be easy, but I think they will get the job done towards the end of the season. We'll talk about their schedule here coming up. And ultimately, I think this is going to be a brand new Maryland team. Josh Jackson, like I said, coming in, a pretty solid running back core. If their defense can improve, I think this team has a chance to get some upsets. So let's take a look at their schedule. Starting in week 1, they have a date with Howard University. I think they're going to easily be able to win that one. As for week 2, they have they have Syracuse, and that one is going to be a very difficult challenge for them because Syracuse is going to be very good this year. And in all honesty, if Syracuse gets 10 wins this season, that would not surprise me. If you want to get a full preview of how I think Syracuse is going to do this season, you can check out the ACC preview, but I do think the Orange are going to win that game. As for their date with Temple in week 3, it's going to be on the road, which is pretty interesting. But I think they get the job done, and they are able to start off the season 2-1. So they go 2-1 in non-conference play. That jumps them straight into Big 10 play with Penn State at home, and that's not going to be an easy game for them right out of the gun. And I do think they drop that game, and they keep exchanging wins and losses for the next few games. In fact, I think their first 8 games go win-loss, 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 win-loss. Next few games are at Rutgers, which is a win, at Purdue, which is a loss, at home versus Indiana, which is a win, and then at Minnesota, which I think is a loss. And then 3 of their last 4 games are against teams that are going to be competing for the championship in the Big Ten, with Michigan at home. I think they lose that game. Then they go on the road into Columbus to take on Ohio State in the shoe. I think they lose that game. But then they have a game versus Nebraska at home, and Nebraska is going to be a very interesting team in terms of their odds of winning the Big Ten West. I think there's a very good chance that Nebraska actually wins that division, but I do think that this is going to be a fresh Maryland team coming off a bye. They're going to go in and beat the Cornhuskers on November 23rd, and then I think they finish up the season with a loss against Sparty on the road. So that gives them another 5-7 season, 3-6 in conference play, and ultimately I think they missed out on a bowl game in back-to-back years, just like Indiana. Coming up next is Michigan State, a very, very disappointing last season, to say the least. I mean, they went 7-6. They were projected to compete for the Big Ten East title, and they just weren't able to hang with the likes of Penn State, Ohio State, and Michigan. And they ended up losing to Oregon in the Red Box Bowl in the battle of the teams that were underachieving last season. So, will this be a bounce-back year for Brian Lewerke, who has a ton of great upside and a possibility of being an NFL quarterback? I think so. Mark D'Antonio is not going to give up on him, and I think this is going to be a huge bounce-back season for Brian Lewerke. Mark D'Antonio's great football mind, I think they can get them back to where they need to be. They returned their entire offensive line, And on the defensive side, they only allowed 17.2 points per game. And they have Joe Bacci, who led the team in tackles. He's returning for his senior season. So some of the negatives, like I said, Lorca definitely underperformed. He only had 2,040 yards and 8 touchdowns with 11 interceptions last season. And the Spartans were they were expected to have 10-plus wins last year. And that's what they did in 2017, and Lorca was able to perform at a very solid level. So I think this year is going to be a lot more like 2017 and a lot less like 2018. So I think if Sparty underperforms in this season, I think D'Antonio is going to be on the hot seat. And I think this is definitely going to be one of those years where they bounce back and compete for the East title. And I think they have a pretty favorable schedule. They do have to play Ohio State and Michigan on the road, but the rest of their games throughout their schedule are going to be a lot more favorable. So let's go ahead and start week 1. They have a Friday game against Tulsa. I think they're going to be able to easily win that one with no problem. Then week 2, I think they get another win against Western Michigan, and then finish off the non-conference schedule with 3 consecutive wins against Arizona State. All 3 of those games are at home. And they have their first road game. It's going to be a tough one. It's going to be at Northwestern. I expect the Wildcats to have a very solid year after winning the Big Ten West last year, and they definitely have a chance to repeat with some pretty solid incoming pieces. I'll talk about that here in a little bit. I think they then come back home, and they get a win at home versus Indiana, and all of a sudden they are 5-0 and sitting pretty. Then things get tough. They take on Iowa State and Wisconsin, both on the road in back-to-back weeks to start out October. I think they lose both of those games, but bounce back with a win against Penn State after a bye on October 26th to finish off the month of October. Then I think they get hot in the month of November with a win against Illinois at home, but I think they lose on the road against Michigan, and they finish off the year with wins on the road at Rutgers and Maryland at home. So where does that put them on the season? That puts them right at 9-3 and 6-3 in the conference. So I think this is going to be a bounce back year and a chance to win 10 games if they can win their bowl game. I do not think that this is going to be good enough to get to the conference championship. Now let's move on to the Wolverines, who went 10-3 last year. Lost to Florida in the Peach Bowl, and they really showed that they are going to be a contender in the year of 2019, with a lot of good pieces coming back, including 7 offensive starters, including quarterback Shea Patterson. They also have safety Josh Metellus coming back, as well as defensive tackle Carl Kemp, who I think is one of the best defensive linemen in the conference. So there are quite a few downsides here with Karan Higdon leaving, as he was able to rush for a little under 1,200 yards last year. Jim Harbaugh is going to be on the hot seat, but I think that could be for the positive, with the team having another reason to have a big year, try to help his coach out. He has a record of just 2-6 against Ohio State and Michigan State, and the Wolverines fans are not going to let that fly for too much longer. You lose big names to the NFL on defense, such as Devin Bush, Rashawn Gary, and Chase Winovich. Those are huge losses, but like I said, you have Carlo Kemp coming back, and honestly, I'm really surprised he did not leave for the NFL, as they could have probably done a 4-for-4 on the defensive line just like Clemson did. So taking a look at their schedule, theirs is pretty light as well, with just 5 road games in 2019. I think it definitely sets them up for a great possibility of making the Big Ten championship game. They start out with Middle Tennessee and Army. I think those are going to be back-to-back wins in weeks 1 and 2. Then they have a bye week going into week 3 where they take on, week 4, where they take Wisconsin on in Madison. And that is going to be a huge game for them early. I think they get the win, and that's going to be one of the marquee wins for this team in conference play. Moving forward, they get back-to-back wins against Rutgers and Iowa in weeks 5 and 6. And then continuing with the month of October, they win on the road against Illinois, and then I think they end up getting the win against Penn State on the road, another very tough game there. And fortunately for them, they have Ohio State at home later on in this season, but I do think they win that game as well. Then they have a game against Notre Dame, and that's going to be another very good one. Fortunately for Michigan, it is at home on October 26th. I think they win once again, and all of a sudden, this team is 8-0, and they are primed for a college football playoff spot. Then they move on with their final 4 games of the season in the month of November with a game on the road at Maryland. I think they win there, and then they have a week off before taking on their in-state rivals, Michigan State. I think they win that one as well. And then I mentioned Indiana. I think they're going to beat Michigan. It's on the road, and then they will finish off the season with defeating Ohio State for the first time in Jim Harbaugh's era. So that puts them at 11-1, 8-1 in conference play. I do think they make the Big 12 championship game. Whether or not I think they're actually going to make the college football playoff, stay tuned for that prediction at the end of the podcast. Moving on to Ohio State, and they arguably were snubbed out of a football playoff spot last season with a 12-1 record, only lost that 42-20 Friday night thriller at Purdue. They were able to beat Washington in the Rose Bowl game, and this season they are going to bring back quite a few pieces, but they're going to lose their biggest piece of all, and that's, of course, their quarterback, Dwayne Haskins, who left for the Washington Redskins, who finished with 4,800-yard plus season, and they're going to replace him with sophomore Justin Fields, who was announced as the team starter earlier in the week. So they also lost Paris Campbell to the NFL, who had over 1,000 yards, and then you also lose your head coach, Urban Meyer, and in comes Ryan Day. So how will the Ryan Day era start for the Buckeyes? Well, they get J.K. Dobbins back, and boy, is that a nice piece to have, especially after losing one of their best pass catchers and their quarterback after a 1,000-plus yard season. Could be a dark horse candidate for the Heisman Trophy. I really love this guy. I always have, even coming into his freshman season. I said, watch out for this guy. He's going to be sneaky hot. They also get KJ Hill back, wide receiver, with 885 yards last year. Could be a breakout performer. Might be the number one receiver for Fields. And they bring back 9 starters to the defense, including their top 5 tacklers. And really, I think the defense is going to be where this team really shines through. It's going to be a lot of low-scoring games for the Buckeyes. And I think this is going to be a nice season. And the schedule for the Buckeyes, they also, like their rivals Michigan, have just 5 road games, one, of course, being against the Wolverines, and none of which are against Michigan State, Wisconsin, and Penn State, Northwestern, all home games, which is great news for the Buckeyes. I think it's going to set up very nicely for Ryan Day this season. So in week 1, they take on Florida Atlantic. Lane Kiffin, I don't think is going to get the win here on the road at the Shoe. I think they start 1-0. And then they have an intriguing matchup against the Cincinnati Bearcats in week 2. I think they're going to be able to beat the AAC team in the same state. I think they get a win there and start off the season 2-0. And then they have a conference game in week 3 at Indiana. It's going to be a tough game. I think Ohio State is going to be tested by the Hoosiers, but I think in the end Ohio State is going to win that one. And like I said, a low-scoring kind of game. Then they finish off their non-conference schedule with a win against the MAC team in the Buckeye State, Miami of Ohio, and all of a sudden they're 4-0. But obviously a bowl bid is not enough for Buckeye fans. They always want to grab that ship. 2014 national champions. First ever college football playoff champion. So moving on, they take on the Cornhuskers at Nebraska. That's going to be a tough game in Lincoln. That's going to be their first big test of this season. I think they get the win on the road. They're now 5-0, and then they come home for a tough battle. They'll be under the lights and under the scope of the College Football Playoff Committee against Michigan State. That's going to be a tough one for them. This is probably going to be their toughest game to date. I think they'll be able to take care of Nebraska. I wouldn't say easily, but I think they're going to struggle with Michigan State just a little bit more. But I think they get the win, and they are 6-0 like Ohio State. Are they going to be able to come back and make the college football playoff in the first year of Ryan Day's season? Well, not so fast, my friend. I think they come back with a couple losses in a row at Northwestern, and then I think they lose at home against Wisconsin, which would be their only home loss to date. And I think for the rest of the season, just kind of gives you an idea of where I'm leaning towards for the rest of the year. So that puts them at 6-2, probably out of the college football playoff race once again, but still trying to get into the Big Ten championship, trying to keep a close eye out on Michigan. But things aren't looking very good because at this point Michigan is still undefeated going into the month of November. So then they start out with a game against Maryland after a bye week. I think they come back strong with the win there. They're going to be red hot, a chip on their shoulder after losing 2 straight games. They get a win there, and then they get another win On the road against Rutgers, not going to have any problems there. And I think they come back with another tough game with Penn State. I think they win that one as well at home, and then their final game of the regular season will be against Michigan on the road. I think they lose that one to give them a 9-3 record overall and a 6-3 record in the Big Ten. And overall, I think this team is going to be solid, and they'll get a pretty good bowl game, competing for a New Year's Six bowl. But I think they're going to be on the outside looking in. I think they have a very solid resume, but I think with a very easy schedule, not I would say very easy, but an easier schedule with a lot of their tough opponents being at home, I think they're probably not going to get in, especially with 3 losses. So not a bad year for Ryan Day, but for Ohio State fans, it's going to be a little bit lackluster, considering they have been a national championship contender for pretty much almost every single season in the past decade. Moving on to Penn State, last year went 9-4 with an upset loss to Kentucky in the Citrus Bowl. That was a very interesting year for the Wildcats. Talk about them in our SEC preview coming up on Friday, so stay tuned for that. So, some of the pros would be, well, they only have 2 underclassmen on the whole entire defense, which will be led by a great defensive mind named James Franklin, of course. Sophomore linebacker Micah Parson had an impressive year with a team-leading 82 tackles. And you also have 2 seniors in Jan Johnson and Cameron Brown by his side to lead a fantastic linebacker core, which should be one of the best in the conference. On some of the negative sides, you have an unexperienced wide receiver core. Your quarterback, running back combo of the all-time passer, Trace McSorley, and 1,200-yard rusher, Miles Sanders, both gone to the pros. And then Sean Clifford will be taking over the offense, and this really was not a very good recruiting class for the Nittany Lions, nor was it a year where they bring back a bunch of pieces. They lose a lot to the transfer portal. Having said that, I do think they're going to bounce back and have a pretty solid season. And now, you can never really count out a James Franklin team. He's a fantastic head coach, and he's going to have a really good defense, which will give the offense a little bit of leeway. Now, having said that, I think they will struggle once they get into the heart of the schedule, and I think their adversity will set in, and that's when things will start to get good for the Nittany Lions towards the end of the season. So, starting off with the first game of the year, they have the Idaho Vandals at home. I think they get the win there. Then they have the Buffalo Bulls on September 7th. That's 2-0. Then they finish off non-conference play 3-0 against the Pittsburgh Panthers. And mentioned it, I think they're probably going to be a solid team, but they're going to struggle with their pretty difficult schedule. I think I had them at 3-9 on the year. Moving into conference play, I think they start off with a win on the road at Maryland to finish off the month of September, and then continue that with a win against Purdue to start October on the 5th. And then I think this is when adversity will sit and realize, man, we really need to get our offense going and do something different. I think they will do something different. It'll change the course of the season, but not before they lose 3 games in a row on the road at Iowa, at home versus Michigan, and on the road against Michigan State. Then I think they'll figure things out going into the month of November. I think they'll turn the season around and finish off strong with winning 3 of the last 4 games at Minnesota, Indiana at home, a loss against Ohio State on the road, and then, of course, an easy win versus Rutgers at home. So that puts them at 8-4, another pretty solid season for James Franklin. Again, this is going to be, you kind of look at it, they went 9-4 last season, but coming back with an 8-4 year when they lost, like I said, the all-time leading passer at Penn State, as well as an NFL-caliber running back, I think that's going to be overall a pretty solid year, and I think most Penn State fans are going to be pretty satisfied, despite them not making the Big Ten championship. So last and least is the Rutgers Scarlet Knights. Now, I think they will take a couple steps in the right direction. That's not saying much, though. This is Rutgers football we're talking about here. Last season, their pass catching was just absolutely atrocious. They had Raheem Blackshear in the backfield. He returns, but he only had 367 yards. He has shown some signs of being a pretty good running back, but that offensive line is just absolutely poor. Pass catchers only caught 5 touchdowns in the year of 2018. That is the kind of bad we are talking about with Rutgers. So Artur Sitkowski returns. He's going to be a sophomore this year, the quarterback for the Scarlet Knights. And, I mean, the good news is he literally cannot play any worse than he did last season. He had 1,158 yards, just 4 touchdowns, and 18 interceptions. This was a bad year for Rutgers football. They went 1-11 last year. On the good news, I think Raheem Blackshear, like I said, I think he'll take a few steps in the right direction. I think he is a pretty solid player. It's just unfortunate that he is in the scheme that he is in. And overall, I think they're going to finish 2-10. Just to kind of briefly wrap things up. I think they are able to beat UMass and beat Liberty, and then finish off non-conference season with a loss against Boston College. And I think they go 0-9 in conference play. So, in terms of the East Division, what does that look like in the standings? So that puts Rutgers in dead last in 7th. Indiana, 6th place, 2-7, 5-7 overall. Maryland finishes in hold on. They finish in 6th place, my mistake. Maryland finished 6th place with 3-6, 5-7 overall. I think Penn State, hold on, am I counting right? I'm not counting right, am I? Yes, I am. I'm counting right. Goodness gracious, I can't read, I can't write. You know what? Let's just get back to this. Penn State 5-4, 8-4 overall. Kind of where the top and the bottom of the conference separate. You have your top 4, and then there's the rest, the other 3 teams. Michigan State and Ohio State finish both 6-3, 9-3 overall. But since the Buckeyes beat the Spartans in the regular season, I think that gives them the tiebreaker. So Ohio State finishes in 2nd. Michigan State finishes in 3rd, and I think Michigan gets it done finally and wins the Big Ten East with an 8-1 record, 11-1 overall. As for the West, let's go ahead and start things off with the Illinois Fighting Illini, who went 4-8 last year, and they did a great job of taking advantage of the transfer portal. They got Michigan transfer quarterback Jordan Peters. They have also a wide receiver Trevon Sidney coming in from USC, as well as USC defensive end transfer Olawale Batiku, who transfers in, who was the number 16 overall recruit in the 2016 class. They also have running back Reggie Corbin coming back, and as well as their leading receiver Ricky Smalling. And on top of that, they come back with 10 starters on the defensive side of things. And overall, I think this is going to be a pretty solid team top to bottom. Now, having said that, this is Illinois football we're talking about here. Lovie Smith is at the helm. I think he is really going to struggle again this year with his coaching in terms of putting the pieces together. Their best recruit last year, within the last decade, defensive back Marquez, I think it's Beeson, tore his ACL in practice last week. He was number 91 overall in the country, and just a really unfortunate thing that it happened. And I think that's going to really take a step back for this defense. Overall, the defense was not good at all last year. 31.3 points per game in their Big Ten losses. And I think they'll get better, but I don't think that it's going to be good enough to knock off some teams that have some really solid skill position players, such as Wisconsin, Michigan, Michigan State, and so on and so forth. And on top of that, they have a brutal schedule this season. So let's go ahead and dive into that schedule. They start off with a fairly light conference, or non-conference play rather. They start off with a game versus Akron. I think they get the job done there and start off the season 1-0. Then they come back with a win at UConn, and the Huskies, I think, are going to really struggle here with their non-conference play. I already have them with 2 losses. And then they finish off with a win against Eastern Michigan and start the season off 3-0. Things are looking pretty good, and they're trying to get to a bowl game with what looks like a pretty solid offensive core from top to bottom with those transfers coming in. However, I think some of the growing pains will start to sit in Week 4 against the Nebraska Cornhuskers at home. I think they lose that one, and Nebraska, I think, is going to have no problem taking care of business on the road. And I think they come back with another loss on the road to start off the month of October against Minnesota, and then another loss against Michigan at home on October 12th. So they're midway through October, and they have played 6 games. They are now 3-3 after winning 3 in a row and losing 3 in a row. So all of a sudden they need to win half of their games just to get to a bowl game. So then they come back with what I think is going to be a win against the Wisconsin Badgers, who are going to be in kind of a transition year, in my opinion. They do have a chance to contend for a Big Ten West Division title, but I do think there are going to be some problems. I think they're going to lose some games that they should win, and I think that is going to be one of them. I think the Fighting Illini beat the Wisconsin Badgers at home, and they finish off with a loss at Purdue to end the month of October. So now there's 4 games left, and they all of a sudden are right back at 4-4. And unfortunately, they have some tough road games coming up. I think they take care of business against Rutgers, And all of a sudden, they're just one win away from making a bowl game. But they have dates against Michigan State and Iowa on the road. I think they lose both of those. And then a tough Northwestern team at home to finish off the season. I think they lose that game as well. And they lose their final 3 games of the season to miss out on the postseason once again. And finish with a record of 5-7 and 2-7. I think Lovie Smith is going to be on the hot seat after this year with a lot of potential, just not able to produce. As for the Iowa Hawkeyes, they finished last season 9-4 with an upset victory over Mississippi State in the Outback Bowl. How will they be able to compete in 2019? Well, they bring back senior quarterback Nate Stanley after almost a 3,000-yard season, 26 touchdowns, 10 interceptions, really a overall solid year. You also have your leading rusher Mackey Sargent coming back after getting 745 yards and 9 touchdowns, and then they have defensive end A.J. Epineza, I had to practice that one, returns, and he's honestly, talent-wise, one of the best defensive players in the country. So on the loss side, they lose their top 3 pass catchers, including T.J. Hawkinson, who went to the Lions, Noah Fant, who went to the Broncos, and then Nick Easley, who just graduated, didn't go pro. And also, they only have 4 starters returning on defense. Now, I think they will be fine on the defensive end, but I think that it will be a problem in some spots, and it's going to prevent them from getting more wins than they had last year. So getting into the schedule, they start off with a win against Miami of Ohio, and then, they start conference play pretty early in week 2. They take on Rutgers. I think they get the job done there and start the season 2-0. However, they take on their in-state rivals, Iowa State. It's going to be in Ames this season. That's going to be a pretty solid Iowa State team. I think they lose that one and get their first loss of the season and finish up non-conference play with a win against Middle Tennessee. So going into the month of October, this team is going to be sitting pretty solid with a 3-1 record, but the month of October is brutal for Iowa. It is not let up at all. So you start off with Michigan on the road. I think they lose that one. Penn State at home. I actually do think they get the win there. They get an upset. Then they have Purdue at home, which is probably their easiest game of the month, and that's not going to be an easy one. Purdue is going to have a very solid year in 2019. And they finish off with a road game against Northwestern. I think they dropped that one. So they finished 2-2, which is a pretty solid record. I think they should be pretty happy with that. And all of a sudden, this team's 5-2. And judging by their record, they should be at least in consideration for being in the top 25. If not, they'll have quite a few receiving votes. But I do think they will struggle in the month of, at the end of October and into November. I think they lose at Wisconsin to start off, and then they get easy wins against Minnesota and Illinois, as they should, to give them a 7-4 record. And I think they lose at Nebraska to end the season, as that game will be on a Friday night, and that one, and Lincoln is going to be rocking there, as they are trying to seal a spot in the Big Ten championship game. So overall, not a bad season for the Iowa Hawkeyes. 7-5, 5-4, probably a little bit of a disappointing season, but I think there is a lot of potential for this team to come back even stronger in the year of 2020. So I think they'll get a bowl game, just not, maybe not a New Year's Six bowl. Then up next is the Minnesota Golden Gophers, who went 7-6 last year, and they were able to beat Georgia Tech in the Quick Lane Bowl. Both teams not deserving of a bowl game, but as we have in the year 2019, we have, for some reason, 6-win teams are still making bowl games. Still don't know why that is. I know the answer is money, but man, it's just so hard to get invested in bowl games like these, especially with now the college football playoff. And it's like, I don't care about these 6-win teams that did mediocre in conference play. And if I'm me as a Kansas State fan, if we go 6-6, I don't want to see our team play. Like 2015, Kansas State went 6-6 after a terrible season. They went 3-6 to start the season, somehow won their last 3 games, and they take on Arkansas and they get smacked in the Liberty Bowl. Like I didn't want to watch that. There's no need. I mean, as a Kansas State fan, if we win that game, so what? Big whoop. We've been an SEC team. Like I don't really care. And I feel like a lot of the teams that are making these bowl games, I think a lot of them do like having the bowl game there just to kind of end the season on a right note. But man, the fact that you lose that bowl game and you finish the season under 500, you shouldn't be in the postseason if you are a Power 5 team and you are under 500. There's no way that you should be in the postseason. I mean, basketball. If you're a 500 team, you're a joke. I mean, you're not looking good. I think that's the reason why there are in football. I mean, football and basketball. To compare those two is not very fair, right? You have non-conference schedule that's much more heavy in smaller teams in basketball as opposed to football. You have to play at least one Power 5 team if you're a Power 5 team yourself. But I mean, it's even not a Power 5 team, a FBS team that you have to play. But man, this is I think it's just an absolute joke. But I think I've expressed my opinion on that in the past. I think that teams in Power 5 conferences should have to have at least 8 wins in order to get to a bowl game. I mean, or 7 or 8 wins, one of the two. I think that a team at 7-5, depending on the schedule, could deserve a spot in the postseason. But you have an argument for those 7-win teams. But I think 8, is about where you should draw the line in terms of, like, you compare basketball and football. Again, the comparison, basketball and football in college. If you make the tournament, you're a solid team. There's no question about that. You're not a team that's just barely scraping by to finish 500. You're a team that is a winning record in your conference. I mean, usually. Sometimes there are exceptions. But you are a team that has fought hard and has a lot of potential to do some damage in the postseason. And you can't have like a Minnesota. If you throw them up against like someone like Ohio State, they're going to get smacked. I mean, it's just a joke. I think it's an absolute joke, and I think I have expressed that in the past. And I don't know why I got on that huge rant. I think it's just the fact that seeing that the Minnesota Golden Gophers made a bowl game last season, same with playing against Georgia Tech. I think that's absolutely ridiculous. So, anyway, moving forward, kind of getting off of that tangent. Will they make a bowl game in 2019? We'll go ahead and answer those questions here. But first, kind of comparing the positives versus the negatives for this team. So last year, Zach Annexstad was set to be the starter. He was a freshman last year, and he played poorly in his first 2 games. Then he was out indefinitely with a internal injury in his midsection, quote unquote. And it actually wasn't 2 games. It was about halfway through the season. Thinking about Purdue, that was my mistake there. I get those two mixed up in terms of quarterbacks, not necessarily the teams. But regardless, it was Tanner Morgan who came in, and he has some experience. He played decent last year, had 1,400 yards and 9 touchdowns. It's fine. Not great, but Zach Annexstad is actually out again with a toe injury, and it's just been a really unfortunate set of events in his college career. Hopefully he can bounce back and do something moving forward, maybe transfer to a different school and find some more success there. But regardless, Tanner Morgan is going to be the starter for the Golden Gophers this season. They returned 9 starters on the offense, including their pass catchers, Chris Ottenbell, Rashad Bateman, and one of the best wideouts, not only in the conference, but in the nation, Tyler Johnson, who almost had 1,200 yards last season and finished with 12 scores. So this team has a lot to look forward to on the offensive side of the ball. Defensive side of the ball, not so much. And as a result, I think they will struggle against some of the better teams in the conference. So having said that, starting off in Week 1, they will take on South Dakota State. I think they get the job done in Week 1 with the win. Then in Week 2, should be an interesting matchup as they take on Fresno State on the road. I think it'll be a tough test for them, but I think they ultimately get another win. And as for their final non-conference game, it will be against Georgia Southern. I think they once again get a win there, and they start off the season 3-0. So a pretty solid start for the Golden Gophers, and looks like they might repeat for the postseason in 2019. That's when conference play starts. They do have a bye going into their first conference game against Purdue, but I think they still drop that one. The Boilermakers are going to be for real this season. Illinois, I think they defeat them. It's going to be at Minnesota. I think that is going to be a nice win for them, and all of a sudden they are 4-1. And I think then lose at home against the Cornhuskers, and then have 2 more wins against Rutgers and Maryland, and all of a sudden this team 6-2 could possibly be ranked. That's just because they do have a pretty easy schedule in the months of September and October, but then November is going to hit them like a brick wall, and that's going to be where this team kind of spirals out of control and becomes sort of just another mediocre Big Ten team. I think they lose their final 4 games of the season at home versus Penn State, Iowa on the road, Northwestern on the road, and then Wisconsin at home. I could see them getting that upset against the Badgers, but for a time being, I do have them dropping that game and finishing the season 6-6. 3-6 in conference play, which is good enough to get them to another bowl game in the year of 2019. Now up next is the Nebraska Cornhuskers, and this is going to be a very interesting team. Last year, they finished with 4 wins, and 2 years ago, just 3 wins. And this is a team that is just desperate to get back to the promised land, and it really is a shame because there are a lot of Nebraska fans that still think that this is a powerhouse in college football. That's just not the case anymore. They will need to do a lot here with Scott Frost in the coming years to get back to that sort of relevance. I'm talking national title contentions every single year, winning multiple Big 12, make that Big 10 conference championships in a row. I just don't see that happening anytime soon, especially with how strong the conference is top to bottom, not only in the West, but the East as well. I have actually 10 of the 14 teams making the postseason in the Big 10. So will they make the postseason this year with Scott Frost in his second season at the helm for the Cornhuskers? Will they get Adrian Martinez back? Could be a dark horse to win the Heisman, in my opinion. J.D. Spielman returns after leading the team in reception yards with 818. And another plus is last year, out of their 8 losses, 6 of them were within just 1 score of each other, and they do not have a single underclassman on their entire defense. Some of the negatives, though, the running back situation, not in the best shape. Well, in terms of experience, that is. In terms of talent, they are up there with Maurice Washington, sophomore. And the middle of the offensive line, struggling in experience. Only 1 upperclassman in the middle of that offensive line with freshman center Cameron Jurgens and sophomore left guard Trent Hickson. So I think this team has a long ways to go in terms of breaking through into the middle of tackles. Maurice Washington is probably going to have to run more horizontal with a couple of junior ends on the left and right side. So getting into the schedule, it's another interesting one. Last year they had their Week 1 game against Troy canceled, and they had to make up with a game against Bethune-Cookman later on in the season. But they do take on another team from that conference in South Alabama. I think they're going to be a little bit rough this year. I think they easily win that one. And they have their date with Colorado once again after the Buffaloes beat them last year. It was one of their marquee losses. And then they finished things off against Northern Illinois. My mistake, they actually lost to Troy. It was the Akron game that was suspended in Week 1. My mistake there. So I think they win all those games. They start off 3-0. And then they finish off the month of September with a win on the road against Illinois and then a loss against Ohio State. So they are 4-1, looking like a solid Big Ten West contender moving forward. Schedule stays pretty favorable for the Cornhuskers to start the month of October with Northwestern at home. I think that's going to be a tough game, but I think they win that one, and then I think they beat Minnesota on the road. That's going to be another tough game, and then Indiana at home. Neither of those are easy games. None of them are going to be easy blowout victories, but I think they do get the job done, and they are 6-1. And not only are looking for a possible Big Ten championship, but possibly a college football playoff spot. Things are looking very good for the Cornhuskers. I then, though, think things are going to get difficult for them in the month of November. They start out with a loss against Purdue on the road. I think the Boilermakers, like I said, I've said over and over, are going to be a very solid team in 2019. I think they actually beat Wisconsin after this team is going to not be happy with the fact that their college football playoff hopes are dashed by the Boilermakers as they come off a bye to come back against Wisconsin on November 16th. And then I think they finish their final 2 games with a 1-1 record, with a loss on the road against a very solid Maryland team, and then they beat Iowa to finish off the season 9-3, 6-3 in the division. So now we have Northwestern. Then to finish things off, we have Purdue and Wisconsin. 3 more teams left. Looks like on time we're doing pretty good, 43 minutes. Although Big 12 was only about 45 minutes, so it might be a little bit over what our normal time is, but no problem. It's all because of my 6-6 rant. But moving forward, we got the Northwestern Wildcats, who were not 6-6 last year. In fact, they were surprisingly in the Big Ten Championship. They lost to the Buckeyes and finished the year 9-5. And they were actually able to win their bowl game. It was the Holiday Bowl in which they beat the Utah Utes. So going into the season, they have some interesting shakeups from top to bottom. I think there's a very large range of outcomes for this team. In other words, I think they could rather finish with a very solid year, or they could crash and burn and not make a bowl game. But regardless, I'm going to try to make a mess or make some order out of the mess that is the Northwestern Wildcats in 2019. So they have the backup quarterback of the Clemson Tigers last season in Hunter Johnson. Actually, he was a third string last year behind Kelly Bryant and, of course, Trevor Lawrence. So they get him from the transfer portal, as well as bringing back Isaiah Bowser after a very solid freshman season in the backfield, 866 yards. And then possibly the best linebacker core in the conference with sophomores Blake Gallagher and Patty Fisher, who combined for 243 tackles last season. Gallagher led the way with 127, and Fisher had the remaining 116. Some of the bad things for this Wildcat season, their schedule is probably the most difficult in the entire conference. Is going to be a brutal, especially in the front portion of the schedule. If they can get through that, they will be more than golden. Their wide receiver core is going to be relatively weak this season, but they are going to be as good as their quarterback, which is going to be pretty solid. I think there'll be a couple guys that can step up and be good, but in terms of their overall talent, they are lacking in that area, and their defensive line also could use some work. So starting things off in non-conference play, they have Stanford on the road, and man, that's just a brutal way to start your season. I think they lose that one at Stanford in week 1, but then they have a bye week going into week 3. They take care of the UNLV Run Rebels at home, and then in week 4 they have Michigan State at home, and all of a sudden this team is 1-2. Things are not looking good, especially after a year where they won the Big Ten West. But then they come back with an upset win at Wisconsin in week 5 to finish off the month of September, and then going into the month of October is when things finally start to soften up in terms of the schedule. But it starts off with a tough game at Nebraska. I think they lose that one. That's going to be a tough game, as 3 of their first 5 games are on the road this season and against 3 very good teams. But then they have a bye week, and they take on Ohio State on Friday night. And as mentioned during the Buckeyes preview, I think they get the upset and beat Ohio State to get their 3rd win of the season to get back to 500. Then from there, I think things are going to be some smooth cruising for the Northwestern Wildcats, with finishing off things in October with a win against Iowa at home. That's probably going to be their toughest game in the remainder of the season. It tells you how things kind of lighten up. And in fact, 4 of their final 6 games are going to be at home, which will be very nice for their chances to possibly come back and knock off a couple teams and give themselves a shot at the Big Ten title for the 2nd consecutive year, which is really surprising. They then, I think, get a win on the road against Indiana, which is probably their toughest road game in the final remaining 6 games. And I think they get the job done against Purdue at home. That's going to be a tough game for the Boilermakers. I don't think they're going to be able to get the win there. Then they have their final non-conference game of the year against UMass. They take care of them with no problem after continuing their 3-game winning streak. I think they then get wins against Minnesota at home, and then they finish off the season with a win in Champaign, knocking off the Fighting Illini on November 30th, and this team is 9-3 and have already matched their win total from 2018. I think it's going to be a big year for the Wildcats, and I've seen a lot of other experts talk about this team and have them around 7-5, 6-6, but I'm really high on the Wildcats this year. I have a lot of faith in Hunter Johnson. I think it's going to really improve the wide receiver core. Isaiah Bowser is going to have another really solid sophomore season. Gallagher and Fisher are really going to bolster that defense, and I think this is going to be a very solid team who has a chance at making a New Year's Six bowl. Especially with their strength schedule, too. It's going to be one of the toughest schedules in the country. If they can get through that first 5 games, I mentioned that they think they're going to go 2-3 in the first 5 games, and I think they're going to win their final 6 games, actually 7 games, in the regular season to finish off the year. Again, 9-3 overall and 7-2 in Big Ten play. So let's then move on to Purdue, who I have mentioned multiple times. I think is going to be a very solid team, but where does that put them at in terms of their schedule? Well, first off, kind of talking about some of their solid position players, I think you have Elijah Sindelar coming back after a very brutal injury in week 2. David Blau came in, and he was fantastic for the remainder of the season. Then you have sophomore wide receiver Rondale Moore, one of the most prolific playmakers in all of college football, had 1,258 yards last season with 12 scores. And then on top of that, you have your leading tackler Marcus Bailey coming back for his senior season after having 115 tackles. So some of the negatives, they only have 3 starters returning on the offensive side. You lose David Blau, the quarterback, who was just fantastic for filling in for Elijah Sindelar. And then really I think the running game is going to be pretty irrelevant for this Purdue team. And on top of that, a very difficult non-conference schedule, and all of which are against FBS schools. Let's start off with the first game against Nevada. It's going to be on the road. That's probably going to be their easiest game in non-conference play. I think they get the win. It's going to be on a Friday night. I think that play is going to be rocking, but I think they still end up with a 1-0 record going into week 2, where they take on Vanderbilt. That'll be a home game. I think Vanderbilt is going to have a better season than they did last year, but I do think they're going to lose this game. I think Purdue starts off the year 2-0, and then they finish off non-conference play against a very solid TCU team who is going to have some quarterback problems, in my opinion, because, being a K-State fan, Alex Dillon could be their starting quarterback, and that could be a lot of problems for the Horned Frogs. But regardless, I still have them beating Purdue. So that gives them a 2-1 record. They have a bye week going into conference play, which is always nice. They start off with a home game against Minnesota. I think they beat the Golden Gophers at home. Then come back into the road scheme with a loss at Penn State. And then they are able to bounce back with a win at home versus the Terrapins. Then to finish off the month of October, they have a tough game at Iowa and a home game against Illinois. I think they win the home game against Illinois and lose the game against Iowa. And this team has kind of been trading wins and losses with only one stretch with with 2 wins or more in a row, and that is the first 2 games of the season. So this team is now 4-3 with 5 games remaining, and that'd be 4 games remaining. They have a record of 5-3. My mistake. So their final 4 games to start and end the month of November start against Nebraska at home. I think they get the upset there. This is going to be a Purdue team that has a lot to prove. I think Rondale Moore, I don't think Nebraska's secondary is going to have any answers for him. I think he's going to have a big day there and get the win at home. And that will give them bowl eligibility with a record of 6-3. I do think complacency will set in, especially with 2 tough road games at Northwestern and Wisconsin. I think they drop both of those and finish off with a nice win at home against Indiana to give them a 7-5, very respectable 5-4 record in the Big Ten. And I think this is going to be possibly a little bit of a disappointing year. I think Elijah Sindelar will struggle in a few major points in the season. I think they will have that upset against Nebraska, but a couple of upset losses, including against Northwestern and Iowa. So overall, I think it's going to be a pretty solid season for Purdue, but I don't think it's good enough for them to make it into the Big Ten championship game. Last team to break down is the Wisconsin Badgers, as they had a very poor season last year. Alex Hornibrook is gone, and they have a new man at the helm running the offense, and that will be Jack Cohn, most likely, as he was filling in for Hornibrook when he was having some injury problems and his problems with being a mediocre quarterback. Ultimately, Hornibrook is a very solid player, just did not have a good offensive scheme set up for his game, and as a result, he transferred to the Miami Hurricanes. So, honestly, you can't lose with Jonathan Taylor. The running game is going to be very solid. They're going to rely on it very heavily with Jack Cohn at the quarterback. And the problem is they're going to have a lot of stacked boxes playing against him. Jonathan Taylor is going to have a big season, though, coming off a 2,194-yard season with 16 scores. This is offensive line U. There is no team in the country that produces better offensive linemen consistently year after year after year than Wisconsin. I also have a young but very strong wide receiver core that could help out Cohn, and the defense should improve. It wasn't very solid last year. In fact, it was their worst defensive season in half a decade, but it wasn't terrible. Wisconsin's defense year after year has just been very solid. It was just one of those years where they did not have an overall great defensive effort, and as a result, mentioned their worst defensive year in the past 5 seasons. So getting into their schedule, they start off with a tough game on the road against South Florida, and that will be in Tampa. I think they get a win there and start the season 1-0 and come back home for their second non-conference game against Central Michigan. I think they beat the Chippewas at home. And then their next 3 games are actually going to be at home as well. Starting off with Michigan in conference play. I think they lose that one, and then they get upset by the Northwestern Wildcats, and they are 2-2. And man, another disappointing season looks like it's ahead for the Badgers. But I think they bounce back nicely with wins against the Kent State Golden Flashes, and then I think they beat Michigan State to start the month of October 2-0. Then they continue with their nice play, but not after a loss at home, or excuse me, rather on the road in Champaign against the Fighting Illini. But I think they win on the road at Ohio State, and then I think they are able to win against Iowa, and that puts them at a record of 7-3. Things not too bad for Wisconsin after all. I think they lose against Nebraska on November 16th. That would be 2 weeks after a bye, and then finish off with 2 wins against Purdue in Minnesota. So that puts them at 8-4, 5-4 in conference play, and looks like they possibly could have the exact same record as they did in 2018, which again, a little disappointing. As last year, I mentioned they went 8. I don't think I did mention, but they went 8-5 last year, and were able to beat Miami in the Pinstripe Bowl. Ironically, that was where Hornibrook went this season, or during the offseason rather. So overall, what does that put the West at? Well, I mean, overall, top to bottom, very solid division, but there's not really any teams that could break out and potentially give the Michigan Wolverines a run for their money. I have Northwestern winning the Big Ten West once again with a record of 7-2, 9-3 overall record, with Nebraska in second, solo second at 6-3, 9-3 overall as well. Then I have Wisconsin, Iowa, and Purdue all tied for third, but Wisconsin gets the tiebreaker with them beating both the Hawkeyes and the Boilermakers, also being 8-4 overall. Then I have Iowa beating Purdue, so they get the second place spot in that three-way tiebreaker. Then Purdue getting the fourth spot, or should be the fifth spot in the conference. Iowa fourth and Wisconsin third. And then I have Minnesota. I have them with 3-6 record and 6-6 overall. And then Illinois, the only team out of the Big Ten West not making a bowl game, finishing 2-7, 5-7. So overall, top to bottom, Big Ten, very solid conference with only, I mentioned, 4 teams out of the 13 teams, only 4 not making a postseason berth. No, I had that right. It's 14. My mistake. Okay, so we have Maryland, Rutgers, and Indiana not making it from the East, and Illinois not making it from the West. But I do have Minnesota making it 6-6, once again, just like last year. You have the Big Four in the East, and then I think, I have Iowa and Purdue having pretty solid seasons, going 7-5 and making a somewhat decent bowl game. So overall, I have, like I mentioned, Michigan and Northwestern in the conference championship game. I have the Wolverines slaughtering the Wildcats in the championship game, as Jim Harbaugh is going to be really craving that win there and trying to keep his job, which I think will be on the line if they do not win the conference. Just because of how much they bring back and how much talent they have to put it together and win the conference in 2019, or else this is not going to be considered a success for Jim Harbaugh. 10-2 with a spot in the championship game and getting a New Year's Six Bowl and winning a New Year's Six Bowl, that's not going to cut it. At least in my opinion. It might cut it for the athletic director of the Michigan Wolverines, but the fans are not going to be happy, and neither are the... that's it. The Ohio State fans will probably be happy if Jim Harbaugh leaves. But regardless, I think Ohio State and Michigan State both, as mentioned, make possible arguments for a New Year's Six Bowl, but I think they both fall short. And overall, I think Michigan does get a spot in the college football playoff. They are the second team that I think is in, with Clemson being the first from the ACC, Michigan the second team. So only have 2 conferences left. Pac-12, could they get a team in, or the SEC once again to get 2 teams in? Stay tuned tomorrow and Friday to catch my Pac-12 and SEC predictions for the year of 2019. So once again, I have Michigan 11-1, Northwestern 9-3, competing for that Big Ten championship, and the Wolverines coming out on top. So that's going to go ahead and do it for my Big Ten predictions. Thank you, everyone, for watching and listening on YouTube. What else do we have? Facebook, SoundCloud, iTunes, just everything. I really appreciate all you guys who have continued to support the show. It means a lot to me, and more great content is on the way, including tomorrow with the Pac-12 preview. So, from my apartment building, this is Jared Sleppy signing off. Thanks for listening, everybody. Oh, man. That was a good one. Let me guess, I'm not online. I have had no luck with these live streams, I swear. Does it still say I'm live? Please tell me I'm live. Okay, I think I'm still live. I'm still kind of in, I don't know, preview mode is the right word for it, but I'm still trying to get used to streaming 2 places at once with the streaming service that I'm using, and it's been interesting to say the least. Looks like 30. Oh, yeah, YouTube's just not working really. It says I've only streamed for 36 minutes and the quality is just terrible. So I'll probably have to post these after the fact. Oh well, whatever. Alright, so that's gonna do it for me here. Thanks everyone for watching. We'll see you guys tomorrow.